Your brain physically changes every 63 seconds based on where you direct your attention. Sara discovered this the hard way when she realized she'd been unconsciously rewiring her neural circuits for anxiety and distraction for 3 years straight. The average person checks their phone 96 times per day. That's once every 10 minutes of waking time. Each glance literally sculpts your brain's architecture. By the end of this video, you'll understand the 6 hidden attention patterns that are secretly rewiring your brain right now. I'll show you the neuroscience behind why where you look becomes who you are, and give you the exact framework contemplative masters and modern neuroscientists use to reclaim your most precious resource. You'll discover which of these 6 patterns is dominating your life and how to break free from the ones that are stealing your identity. Here's what most people don't realize. Your attention isn't just what you focus on. It's the invisible sculptor of your reality. Every time you direct your gaze, your thoughts, your mental energy toward something, you're literally voting for the kind of person you want to become. Neuroscientist Rick Hanson calls this taking in the good, but most of us are unconsciously taking in the bad, the scattered, the anxious. The monks knew this centuries ago. They called it where the mind goes, energy flows. Now we have brain scans proving they were right. Your neural pathways strengthen along the routes you travel most frequently with your attention. Look at chaos all day. Your brain becomes chaotic. Focus on what's broken. You become someone who sees brokenness everywhere. But here's the paradox that changes everything. The very thing that's hijacking your attention, your own awareness, is also the key to your freedom. We're about to explore 6 distinct attention patterns that shape your identity. Pattern number 1 is the most common and the most dangerous because it feels productive while slowly eroding your sense of self. Chapter 1. The scatter pattern. Here's something that will shock you. Multitasking doesn't exist. What we call multitasking is actually rapid tasks, and each switch costs you approximately 23 minutes of deep focus recovery time. Yet most people spend their entire day in what I call the scatter pattern. Jumping from email to social media, to work, to texts, to news feeds in an endless cycle of fragmented attention. You know you're in the scatter pattern when your mind feels like a pinball bouncing between thoughts, tasks, and stimuli. You sit down to work on something important, and within minutes, find yourself checking notifications, scrolling feeds, or responding to messages that aren't urgent. By evening, you feel exhausted, but can't pinpoint what you actually accomplished. Here's what's happening in your brain during scatter mode. Each attention switch triggers your anterior cingulate cortex and prefrontal cortex to work overtime, burning glucose and creating mental fatigue. But more importantly, you're training your brain to crave novelty and stimulation. You're literally rewiring yourself to become someone who can't tolerate sustained focus. Dr. Daniel Siegel's research shows that scattered attention patterns create what he calls neural integration disruption. Your brain loses its ability to coordinate between different regions. The result? You feel fragmented, anxious, and increasingly unable to access your deeper wisdom and creativity. The most insidious part of the scatter pattern isn't the productivity loss, it's the identity erosion. When your attention constantly jumps between external stimuli, you lose touch with your internal compass. You become reactive instead of responsive. Your sense of self becomes defined by whatever is demanding your attention in the moment, rather than your deeper values and intentions. I experienced this firsthand during a period when I was managing multiple projects, constantly switching between platforms and tasks. I noticed I was becoming irritable, anxious, and losing my sense of purpose. It wasn't until I tracked my attention patterns for a week that I realized I was giving away my mental sovereignty in tiny increments throughout the day. You're dominated by the scatter pattern if you check your phone within 5 minutes of waking up. You have trouble reading for more than 10 minutes without feeling restless. You often feel busy but unproductive. You struggle to remember what you did yesterday in detail. You feel anxious when you can't access your devices. The antidote to scatter isn't willpower. It's what contemplative traditions call guarding the gates of perception. This means becoming consciously aware of what you allow into your attention field and making deliberate choices about where your mental energy goes. But before you can guard your attention, you need to understand the second pattern that's even more subtle and potentially more destructive than scatter. It's what I call the absorption pattern. And 8 out of 10 people don't realize they're caught in it until it's completely rewired their emotional baseline. Chapter 2. the absorption pattern. While the scatter pattern is obvious in its chaos, the absorption pattern is dangerously deceptive because it feels like deep focus. This is when you get completely absorbed in content, activities, or experiences that pull you into extended states of passive attention. Scrolling social media for hours, binge-watching series, or getting lost in negative news cycles. The key difference from healthy focus is this. In the absorption pattern, you're not directing your attention, it's being directed for you. You lose awareness of time, your body, and your choices. You enter what researchers call flow states, but in service of external agendas rather than your own growth or values. Silicon Valley deliberately engineers absorption patterns. Tech companies hire neuroscientists and behavioral economists to create what Rewire calls variable ratio reinforcement schedules, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. Each scroll, each notification, each like triggers a small dopamine release, training your brain to crave the next hit. But here's what's really happening. Your brain's reward system is being hijacked to serve commercial interests rather than your authentic interests. You're training your neural pathways to seek passive consumption rather than active creation. Over time, this fundamentally changes who you become. Research from the University of Michigan shows that people who spend significant time in absorption patterns experience measurable decreases in empathy and emotional intelligence. When you're constantly consuming other people's curated experiences, emotions, and thoughts, you lose touch with your own inner emotional landscape. I noticed this pattern in myself during a period when I was consuming hours of content daily. Podcasts, videos, articles, social media. I felt informed and stimulated, but I realized I wasn't generating my own thoughts anymore. I was becoming a collection of other people's ideas rather than developing my own perspective. My attention had become a passive receiver rather than an active creator. The absorption pattern doesn't just steal your time, it transplants foreign neural patterns into your brain. When you spend hours absorbing content created by others, you're literally downloading their thought patterns, emotional states, and ways of perceiving reality. Your brain's mirror neurons fire as if you're experiencing what you're consuming, gradually reshaping your own neural architecture. This is why people often report feeling not like themselves after extended periods of media consumption. You're not imagining it. You're literally becoming a hybrid of all the content you've absorbed. You're caught in the absorption pattern. If you frequently lose track of time while consuming content, you feel mentally drained after relaxing with media. You have difficulty generating original thoughts or ideas. You feel more familiar with fictional characters than real people in your life. You use media consumption to avoid uncomfortable emotions. Ancient wisdom traditions understood attention as sacred energy. The Buddha called it mindfulness, the quality of knowing where your mind is and choosing consciously where to place it. When you give your attention freely to forces that don't serve your growth, you're essentially giving away pieces of your soul. But there's an even more insidious pattern than absorption, one that most people mistake for personal development. It's the vigilance pattern, and it's creating an epidemic of anxiety disguised as awareness. Chapter 3. The Vigilance Pattern. The vigilance pattern is the most psychologically complex because it masquerades as consciousness and awareness. This is when you become hypervigilant about threats, problems, and potential dangers, constantly scanning for what's wrong, what needs fixing, or what might go wrong. Many people in personal development fall into this trap, mistaking chronic worry for wisdom. You might think you're being responsible, aware, or prepared, but what you're actually doing is training your nervous system to live in a constant state of low-level fight. Your attention becomes a threat detection system rather than a tool for growth and creation. Our brains evolved a negativity bias. We're naturally wired to notice threats more readily than opportunities. This kept our ancestors alive when physical dangers were immediate and obvious. But in the modern world, this same mechanism gets triggered by abstract threats. Social media outrage, news cycles, and imagined future problems. When you spend your attention constantly scanning for problems in your relationships, your career, your health, the world, you're essentially programming your brain to see danger everywhere. Neuroscientist Rick Hansen calls this taking in the bad, and most of us do it unconsciously all day long. Here's where it gets tricky. The vigilance pattern often feels spiritual or evolved. You tell yourself you're being conscious about problems in the world, aware of potential relationship issues, or responsible about future challenges. But there's a crucial difference between conscious awareness and anxious vigilance. Conscious awareness notices what is, without attachment or reactivity. Vigilance creates mental stories about what might happen, what's wrong, or what needs to be controlled. One brings peace and clarity. The other creates chronic stress and fragmentation. The vigilance pattern is highly contagious. If you spend time with people who constantly discuss problems, threats, or complaints, your brain begins to mirror their neural patterns. You start seeing the world through their lens of vigilance. This is why the ancient Stoics emphasized choosing your influences carefully, not because they were judgmental, but because they understood the neuroplasticity of attention. I discovered this pattern in myself during a period when I was deeply engaged with political and social issues. I thought I was being a conscious citizen, staying informed and aware. But I noticed my baseline mood becoming increasingly anxious and pessimistic. I was rewiring my brain to look for what's wrong rather than what's possible. Chronic vigilance patterns create measurable changes in your body. Your cortisol levels remain elevated, your heart rate variability decreases, and your immune system becomes compromised. You're essentially living in a perpetual state of preparation for threats that rarely materialize in the way your mind imagines them. Dr. Gabor research shows that chronic vigilance patterns are at the root of many autoimmune conditions, digestive issues, and sleep disorders. Your body is designed for acute stress responses, not chronic vigilance states. You're trapped in the vigilance pattern if you feel more comfortable discussing problems than possibilities. You check news or social media first thing in the morning. You have difficulty relaxing without feeling guilty or irresponsible. You often feel like something bad is about to happen. You find yourself mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios. The deepest irony of the vigilance pattern is that it creates the very chaos it seeks to prevent. When you're constantly focused on problems and threats, you're giving your creative energy to what you don't want rather than what you do want. You become a co-creator of the very conditions you're trying to avoid. But there's another attention pattern that's even more subtle and potentially more damaging to your sense of self. It's what I call the comparison pattern, and it's turning your attention into a weapon against your own worth. Chapter 4. The comparison pattern. The comparison pattern is where your attention becomes a measurement tool, constantly evaluating yourself against others. Social media has weaponized this ancient human tendency, creating an endless stream of curated highlight reels for you to measure yourself against. But comparison isn't limited to social platforms. It happens in conversations, at work, in relationships, and even in your own thoughts. Every time you use your attention to compare yourself to others, you're training your brain to see yourself as either superior or inferior, rather than simply unique. You're literally rewiring your neural pathways to make your self-worth dependent on external reference points rather than internal values. When you engage in social comparison, your brain activates the same regions associated with physical pain. UCLA neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman's research shows that social rejection and comparison trigger the anterior cingulate cortex and right ventral prefrontal cortex, the same areas that fire when you experience physical injury. This isn't metaphorical. Your brain literally experiences comparison as a form of pain. And like any pain response, your nervous system develops strategies to avoid it, often leading to withdrawal, defensiveness, compensatory behaviors that further fragment your sense of authentic self. Social comparison also triggers your brain's reward system in unpredictable ways. Sometimes you feel superior, sometimes inferior. This creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive pattern known to behavioral science. Your brain becomes addicted to the comparison itself, regardless of the outcome. I noticed this pattern in my own life when I realized I was unconsciously scanning social media not for connection or information, but to see how my life measured up to others, even when I felt good about my own accomplishments. I found myself diminishing them if someone else seemed more successful, attractive, or fulfilled. The most insidious aspect of the comparison pattern is how it fragments your identity. Instead of developing a coherent sense of self based on your values, experiences, and growth, you become a collection of measurements relative to others. Self-concept becomes externally defined and constantly shifting based on your reference group. Carl Jung wrote about this as losing touch with your individual path. When you constantly measure yourself against others, you lose connection to your unique journey, gifts, and purpose. You become who you think you should be, rather than who you authentically are. Ancient wisdom traditions understood comparison as a form of spiritual violence, violence against your own soul. The Bhagavad Gita speaks of Savadharma, your unique life purpose that can't be compared to anyone else's. When you compare, you're essentially rejecting the divine uniqueness of your own path. This isn't New Age thinking. It's practical wisdom. Every moment you spend comparing yourself to others is a moment not spent developing your authentic gifts, pursuing your genuine interests, or contributing your unique perspective to the world. You're caught in the comparison pattern if you feel worse about yourself after checking social media. You downplay your accomplishments when others seem more successful. You choose activities based on how they'll appear to others. You feel envious or competitive in social situations. You struggle to celebrate others' successes genuinely. Chronic comparison patterns are at the root of what psychologists call imposter syndrome, the feeling that you're fraudulent or undeserving of your accomplishments. When your attention is constantly measuring yourself against others, you never develop a stable internal sense of your own competence and worth. You become dependent on external validation to feel good about yourself, which creates a fragile identity that must constantly be defended and maintained through more comparison and competition. The comparison pattern is rooted in what Stephen Covey called scarcity thinking, the belief that there's not enough success, love, recognition, or fulfillment to go around. If someone else is winning, you must be losing. If someone else is beautiful, you must be less beautiful. If someone else is talented, you must be less talented. But attention itself operates on abundance principles. The more you focus on developing your unique gifts rather than measuring them against others, the more those gifts expand and develop. Comparison shrinks your world. Authentic development expands it. The next pattern we'll explore is perhaps the most paradoxical. It's the seeking pattern, where the very search for meaning and fulfillment becomes the thing that prevents you from finding it. Chapter 5. The Seeking Pattern. The seeking pattern is the most spiritually complex because it appears to be about growth and development. But it's actually a form of chronic dissatisfaction disguised as personal evolution. This is when your attention becomes constantly focused on the next thing, the next course, book, technique, experience, or insight that will finally make you feel complete. You might think you're being proactive about your growth. What you're actually doing is training your brain to believe that fulfillment exists somewhere other than where you are right now. You're creating a perpetual state of spiritual and psychological hunger that can never be satisfied by external acquisition. Chogyam Trungpa coined the term spiritual materialism to describe this exact pattern, using spiritual practices, personal development, and self-improvement as forms of ego enhancement rather than genuine transformation. Your attention becomes focused on collecting experiences, insights, and identities rather than actually embodying presence and authenticity. The seeking mind is always future-oriented. It says, I'll be happy when I understand this, or I'll be peaceful when I master that technique, or I'll be fulfilled when I have that experience. But happiness, peace, and fulfillment are qualities of present moment awareness, not future achievements. When you're in the seeking pattern, your brain gets addicted to the anticipation of reward rather than the reward itself. Neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky's research shows that dopamine fires most intensely not when you get what you want. The seeking itself becomes more compelling than the finding. This creates what psychologists call hedonic adaptation. No matter what you achieve, learn, or experience, your baseline level of satisfaction remains the same because your attention is already focused on the next thing you need to seek. The most subtle trap of the seeking pattern is how it becomes an identity. You become someone who is working on themselves, evolving, growing, healing, or awakening. These are beautiful processes, but when they become chronic identities, they create a subtle form of self-rejection, the belief that who you are right now is not enough. I spent years caught in this pattern, constantly consuming spiritual and psychological content, attending workshops, seeking the next level of understanding or consciousness. It felt meaningful and important, but I realized I was using seeking as a way to avoid fully accepting and appreciating my life as it was. The The seeking pattern often combines with the comparison pattern in particularly toxic ways. You start comparing your level of consciousness, healing, or growth to others. You develop hierarchies of spiritual or psychological development and position yourself somewhere on these imaginary ladders. This turns your personal journey into a competitive sport. Social media has amplified this tremendously. People post about their meditation retreats, therapy breakthroughs, and spiritual insights in ways that create subtle spiritual one-upmanship. Your attention becomes focused on how your seeking compares to others' seeking. You're trapped in the seeking pattern if you have difficulty enjoying present moments because you're focused on improvement. You collect books, courses, and techniques, but struggle with consistent practice. You feel like you're always working on yourself, but never arriving anywhere. You judge others as unconscious or unaware compared to yourself. You use spiritual or psychological language to avoid dealing with practical life issues. The seeking pattern creates what I call beginner's addiction. You get excited about new approaches, techniques, or teachings, but lose interest once the initial novelty wears off, and the work becomes mundane or challenging. You're addicted to the inspiration of starting, rather than the transformation of continuing. This keeps you perpetually in the shallow end of every practice, never going deep enough to experience real change. You become a collector of starting points, rather than someone who follows any single path to its natural conclusion. Chronic seekers often develop what psychologists call guru complex, either projecting magical powers onto teachers and guides, or developing grandiose fantasies about their own spiritual development. Both are forms of avoiding the ordinary, humble work of actually embodying what you claim to understand. The seeking mind wants extraordinary experiences and insights. It's less interested in the mundane work of being kind to difficult people, managing your emotions skillfully, or bringing presence to everyday activities. The antidote to chronic seeking isn't to stop growing or learning. It's to shift from seeking to finding, from acquiring to appreciating, from becoming to being. This means recognizing that what you're seeking is already present in your capacity for awareness, love, and authentic presence. But there's one final attention pattern that underlies all the others. The most fundamental and potentially most liberating? It's what I call the presence pattern. And understanding it changes everything about how you relate to your attention and your life. Chapter 6. The Presence Pattern. The presence pattern is fundamentally different from the other 5, because it's not about where you direct your attention, but how you hold your attention. This is when you develop what contemplative traditions call spacious awareness, the ability to witness your thoughts, emotions, and experiences without being completely identified with them. In the presence pattern, your attention becomes like the sky rather than the clouds. The clouds still arise and pass away, but you're aware of the vast spaciousness in which they appear. This creates psychological freedom because you're no longer at the mercy of whatever arises in your consciousness. Research from Harvard neuroscientist Sara Lazar shows that practices cultivating present moment awareness literally change brain structure. The prefrontal cortex thickens, the amygdala shrinks, the default mode network responsible for self-referential thinking and rumination becomes less active. More importantly, brain scans show increased connectivity between different regions, creating what neuroscientists call global workspace integration. Your brain becomes more coherent, less fragmented, more capable of accessing its full intelligence rather than being hijacked by particular patterns or regions. Here's what's counterintuitive about the presence pattern. The more you try to force it, the more elusive it becomes. Presence isn't something you do, it's something you are. It's your natural state when you're not caught in the other 5 patterns. This is why traditional meditation instructions often sound paradoxical. Try not to try, or let go of letting go. You can't manufacture presence through willpower or technique. You can only create conditions that allow your natural awareness to emerge. Carl Jung described what he called witness consciousness, the part of you that can observe your own psychological processes, without being completely identified with them. When you develop this capacity, you realize that you are not your thoughts, emotions, or experiences. You are the awareness in which they arise. This isn't spiritual bypassing or dissociation. You still feel your emotions fully and think your thoughts clearly, but you're no longer completely at their mercy. There's a part of you that remains stable and spacious regardless of what's happening in your inner or outer world. The real challenge with the presence pattern isn't accessing it. Most people can touch into present moment awareness relatively easily. The challenge is maintaining it while engaged in daily life, relationships, and responsibilities. How do you stay present while dealing with difficult people, stressful situations, or challenging emotions? This is where the rubber meets the road. Presence that only exists in quiet, controlled environments isn't really presence. It's just another form of escape. True presence can hold whatever arises without losing its essential stability and spaciousness. In practical terms, the presence pattern means developing what psychologists call metacognitive awareness. Awareness of your own awareness. You notice when you're caught in scatter, absorption, vigilance, comparison, or seeking patterns without judging yourself for it. This noticing itself begins to create space and choice. Instead of being unconsciously driven by these patterns, you start to recognize them as they arise, and can choose whether to engage with them or not. Your attention becomes conscious rather than automatic. You're accessing the presence pattern when you can feel your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. You notice your thoughts arising and passing away like clouds in the sky. You feel connected to something larger than your personal concerns. You respond to situations rather than reacting automatically. You experience moments of inexplicable peace and spaciousness. Perhaps the most profound impact of developing the presence pattern is how it transforms your relationships. When you're present with another person, not waiting for your turn to speak, not judging or analyzing them, not trying to fix or change them, you create space for authentic connection. Most people are so hungry for this quality of attention that they can feel it immediately when you're truly present with them. Your presence becomes a gift you give to others simply by being fully here with whatever is arising. Understanding these 6 attention patterns isn't about perfecting your attention or never getting caught in unconscious patterns again. It's about developing the awareness to recognize what's happening when it's happening, and the flexibility to choose how you want to relate to your experience. Your attention is your most sacred resource, because it literally creates your reality moment by moment. Where you consistently place your attention is who you become. The question isn't whether you'll direct your attention somewhere. That's inevitable. The question is whether you'll do it consciously or unconsciously. The presence pattern doesn't eliminate the other patterns. It provides the spacious awareness in which you can work with them skillfully. Sometimes scattered attention serves a purpose. Sometimes absorption is exactly what's needed. Sometimes vigilance is appropriate. Comparison provides useful information, and seeking leads to genuine growth. The difference is choice. When you're present, you're the author of your attention rather than its victim, and in that authorship lies your freedom. Conclusion: the sacred economics of attention. We've explored 6 fundamental patterns that govern how your attention shapes your identity: scatter, absorption, vigilance, comparison, seeking, and presence. Each pattern literally rewires your brain and creates the neural foundation for who you become. The scatter pattern fragments your identity across multiple stimuli. The absorption pattern gives your creative power to external agendas. The vigilance pattern keeps you trapped in threat detection mode. The comparison pattern makes your worth dependent on external reference points. The seeking pattern creates chronic dissatisfaction disguised as growth. And the presence pattern offers the spacious awareness in which you can choose consciously rather than react automatically. Your attention operates like a currency. You have a finite amount each day, and every moment you're either investing it or spending it. When you invest your attention in patterns that serve your authentic growth and values, you get compound returns, increased self-awareness, emotional resilience, creative capacity, and the ability to contribute meaningfully to others. When you spend your attention unconsciously on patterns that fragment, distract, or diminish you, you're essentially giving away your life force in exchange for temporary stimulation or the illusion of productivity. The profound truth that neuroscience has revealed is that your brain remains plastic throughout your entire life. Every moment of attention is an opportunity to literally rewire your neural pathways. You are not stuck with the patterns you've developed. You are not a victim of your conditioning or your circumstances. But change requires consciousness. The patterns we've discussed operate automatically until you bring awareness to them. The moment you recognize a pattern as it's arising, you create space for choice. That recognition itself begins to weaken the pattern's unconscious grip on your behavior. What we're really talking about is a revolution in how you relate to your own consciousness. For thousands of years, contemplative traditions have understood attention as sacred, the divine spark within human experience. Modern neuroscience is now proving what mystics always knew. Consciousness is the fundamental creative force in your life. You are not your thoughts, emotions, or experiences. You are the awareness in which they arise. And that awareness, your attention, is the most powerful tool you have for creating the life you want to live and the person you want to become. This isn't just theoretical knowledge. It's practical wisdom that requires daily application. I invite you to begin noticing your attention patterns throughout the day. Which of the 6 patterns dominates your experience? When do you feel most scattered, absorbed, vigilant, comparative, or seeking? More importantly, can you find moments of presence? Brief pauses where you're simply aware of being aware. These moments are seeds of freedom that, when cultivated, can transform your entire relationship with life. For the next week, simply notice. Don't try to change anything yet. Just become aware of where your attention goes and how that affects your inner state. Notice the difference between scattered attention and focused attention. Notice how comparison feels in your body versus appreciation. Notice the quality of your presence when you're truly listening to someone versus waiting for your turn to speak. This noticing itself is the beginning of liberation. You can't change what you're not aware of, but you can't help but change what you become fully conscious of. Remember that your attention doesn't just shape your own reality. It influences everyone around you. When you're present with others, you give them permission to be present too. When you're scattered or anxious, you contribute to the collective fragmentation of our culture. Your attention is not just personal, it's political, social, and spiritual. The quality of your attention contributes to the quality of human consciousness on this planet. Every moment of presence is a gift, not just to yourself, but to the collective evolution of human awareness. You've been given the most powerful force in the universe, conscious attention. How you use it determines not just your own experience, but your contribution to the world. This is both a tremendous responsibility and an extraordinary opportunity. Where you look becomes who you are. Choose consciously the future of your life, and perhaps our collective future depends on it. What pattern did you recognize most in yourself? Drop a number in the comments: -1 for scatter, 2 for absorption, 3 for vigilance, 4 for comparison, 5 for seeking, or 6 if you're already cultivating presence. And if this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to reclaim their most precious resource.